Okay, we're live. Hi, Stephanie. I'm sorry. Like every time I feel like, oh, what a surprise. I'm live, although I click on live. But,
Amazing. I love
uh,
it.
Stephanie, welcome to Winter with Grace today.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
To start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. And I gotten to know you from the amazing leadership in tech community. And I feel like you're just like so like thoughtful, relatable, and you're just awesome to chat with. Also, I'm
Thanks.
very thankful that the last time I consult you on like a lot of marketing strategy and like a lot of the advice I or like basically you kind of like shared with me a lot of like really insightful like marketing insights that I feel like a general founder would not know.
I'm glad
So
it was useful.
I feel like yeah, why don't we start with your like you started your career in Leo Burnett and
Yep.
you have worked at many iconic companies like Kayak and let's start with like how you got into marketing and um what are some like core lessons that you've learned throughout your journey running a bunch of amazing like companies like marketing department?
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I started at Leo Burnett, and the plan was never to go into advertising. In fact, true story, when I started at Leo Burnett, I was in an onboarding program with a bunch of folks who had gone to business school. And I did get at that time a lot of sort of, what are you doing here? Because it wasn't immediately obvious. I mean, I was a liberal arts major. I double majored in English and German in university. And I think that what brought me to Leo Burnett was just sort of a balance of skills, of having an analytical mind, but also having more a creative background. And I think those things paired really well. And I know a lot of people now, actually, having worked in advertising and worked in marketing now my whole career, I know a lot of people that say the same, that they started out, with an arts background and ended up on the business side of things, because of the leanings of their mind or what they were passionate about. And I just found at Leo Burnett and working in advertising and marketing in general, that there's such a sweet spot to be able to bring together sort of, if your mind works at all in an analytical way, like mine does, but you have a passion for the creative, it's a great way to marry art and science. And I think that has remained true as being a core strength when it comes to excelling at a role in marketing, is being able to do both of those things. And so I spent the first half of my career working at big agencies, both on the performance side of things and on the brand side of things. Really learned how the process of making great work happened. And then, took all of that learning and the learning from leading big pieces of business, like Verizon Wireless at McCann and other brands in the tech and telecom space and some automotive, and took that experience to, what advertising folks affectionately call the client side. And most notably at Kayak and some other companies as well, really getting the chance to put into practice everything that I learned about marketing, and to be able to set strategy and dig in and do the work. A lot of my experience, as you've seen, is in the startup realm. And I love that it has become sort of, I'm more aware now that I've been doing it for a while, that that's my sweet spot, that
Mhm,
ability to work high and low, right?
mhm,
To set strategy, but then also dig in and understand how things work. And be able to see the impact of my decision making and be able to empower the team to then do the work, and see the impact of that work that we do as a collective in market is really, really rewarding.
totally. So I wonder, what is it like um, running the marketing department at a bigger company like Kayak versus some startups? Can you walk us through your day to day? And let's say if today, you're like the CMO of a um, fintech startup or like AI startup, whatever
Yeah.
you name it, what would be the first job? What would be the first day on your job look like to kind of work through things?
Yeah, I mean, I think what even precedes the showing up in the morning part is ensuring that the foundation for all of it, I guess, is two things, right? One,
Mhm,
on a personal level, it's clarity of priorities, right? What are the priorities of the business, and ensuring that the marketing priorities align with the priorities of the business, and then making sure that the team is clear on what those priorities are. And there's always going to be fluctuation, and there's always going to be noise, things circling back around. But generally speaking, have you established clear priorities, and is everybody aware of those priorities? Because that's really what the key is to ensuring that people can work autonomously, me included, right? Have I aligned with the rest of my executive leadership on priorities, so that I know I'm focusing on the things that need to be focused on, and therefore the team is focused on the things that they need to be focused on, and then we can go about the day to day. And I think any sort of, if I think of like a day in the life, a lot of it is probably, over the course of each day and each week, checking in. So, number one, waking up in the morning and looking at results. What's
mhm,
happening with the business? Is there
mhm.
anything that doesn't seem quite right? Did we break something? When we launched code on a product, or, for some marketing efforts that are in market, does everything look okay? What's happening in the marketplace that's going to give context to my day, right? Like, even for today's conversation with you, I knew that at some point we would touch on AI and marketing. And so I had a quick look to see what was going on, and we can talk about that. And there's some funny things going on, and there's some awesome things going on. But, checking in with the world at large, and then really, over the course of a week, doing one-on-ones, both high and low, right? Am I talking on a regular basis to my peers to ensure that we're, aligned on the direction that we're taking? Are we looking at results? Are we letting the data drive the decision making? And then also working with everybody on the team to see what issues are they encountering? What do they potentially need my help with? So there's a lot of one-on-ones. By the time you're in that CMO role, you're doing a lot of one-on-ones. You have to ensure that those are efficient and effective, and that they're actually impacting the business. And then you also need to carve out the time for digging in on any issues that come up. If we broke something, let's dig in and figure it out. And that's where that sort of operating high and low comes in. The ability to set aside at least some time to review the results of a research study, or to dig into that thing that doesn't look quite right, and work with the team, whoever is on the team that is responsible for that, to dig into those kinds of things. So that's sort of, more or less feels like what the day to day would look like, I think.
Totally. I wonder, since like I feel like from my more like off like amateur set of things, like I wanted to touch up on like, what are some things that like CMO or like the marketing department do. So like I summarize it as like, there's like the marketing strategy campaigns, there's the growth hacking and like scaling set of things, and then there's like the brand and positioning. And last time we chat about like, for let's say a startup CEO to be marketed in the market, there would be, thought leadership, there will be industry knowledge, there will be some other stuff. So I wonder, when you are thinking about like running a marketing department, first of all, what is in the marketing department? How does like branding person work with the content person, work with the growth person, and like what type of people would fit into these like different kind of roles?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a couple of different ways that we can approach answering it. Maybe I'll sort of start with an umbrella view, and then we can talk about the work that needs to be
Mhm.
done, right? So
Please give us a CMO masterclass. I feel like
I don't know if it'll be a master class, but let's see how we do. When I can break down what happens in a marketing function into some key areas, right? So you brought up the brand and everything associated with the brand. I think that is for sure a part of
Mhm.
it. Then there is performance, and everything is brand and everything is performance. Everything that you do to execute against the brand should drive growth, and everything that you do to drive growth should deliver on the brand promise. So there are very specifically some functional things that happen in there, like you mentioned, positioning and messaging and all of those kinds of things. But I think that there's a lot going on in both of those ecosystems that that need to work together, or that do virtuously impact each other as you go along. Then I think there's also the customer journey work, or CRM. You can put a lot of different labels on that part of it, where you're talking about broadly looking at the customer journey and then also trying to influence parts of the customer journey. Then I think there's just straight up media. What are you spending money on, right?
Mhm.
That planning and buying and optimization. And then I think there's probably the analytics part of it. And I think the wild thing about being a CMO today is that I could probably add like 10 other things onto that, depending on the company that that I'm working for. I've worked as a CMO where I've had customer care as my,
Mhm.
in my remit. I have also worked where I've had research and insights in my remit. And I think that is such a critical part of the mix. And in some instances, that will be in-house. And in some instances, you'll work with a partner to do that. It really depends on the company. I want to come back to that in a second, because that is really central to the work that needs to be done. I think a lot of the work that needs to be done as a marketer really starts with that. But you could also be responsible for sales. You could also, you could be responsible for a variety of different things. And I think that that is really one of the most challenging things about being in that role. Is it a chief marketing officer? Is it a chief brand officer? Is it a chief customer officer? Is it a chief growth officer? Yes to all of those things. And in each instance, there are different bits and pieces that you're taking on. So I would say that, broadly, we've covered the remit, and the remit is massive in scope, or it can be a little bit more narrow depending on the company that you're working at, or work, and the team that you're working with. But I think what's fundamental, for me, to regardless of what the scope of the role is the work that needs to be done. And I saw an interesting McKinsey article a little while ago that that said the role, the chief thing that role is responsible for is educating the rest of the company on marketing. And I think that that might be a necessity. It might be, but I really think that the core of the role is being the representative of the customer, educating the rest of the company on the customer. And so when I think about the work that needs to be done, I always start with the customer. I think long gone are the days where you had a product line orientation, like the product line view to the world. Like I believe there is product market fit, but this is just a really cool product and I'm going to go to market with it. There are so many companies that have gone wrong only doing the product out viewpoint and not ensuring product market fit, and not having the customer, have a seat at the table, whether that customer is, on the strictly consumer side or on the B2B side, or both of those things, not adequately representing the customer. And so for me, when I am looking at an opportunity, or I look at the work that I'm doing with my team, the number one thing for me is always, do we understand the customer? Do we know our current customers? Do we know who our best customers are? Do we know who our worst customers are? And what I mean by worst customers isn't that they're bad people. What I mean by worst customers is that does it cost more to have them as a customer than brings in? And if so, I probably want to pay less attention to those folks and want to focus more of my energies as a marketer on those people that are the most valuable. And then who is my best prospect audience? Who are the most desirable among the people that are not my customers yet, or my users yet? And how do I get those? And so I'll always favor foundationally the work being done in that realm, a segmentation study. And by segmentation, I don't want to know that Sally wears red shoes on a Sunday. I can't target that person with what I do from a marketing perspective. It has to be actionable segmentation. I think a lot of folks get lost in segmentation, and it becomes a very sort of theoretical exercise, when really what it needs to be driving towards is how it can enable strategy and enable execution. And so I'll always be in favor of doing that work if you haven't done it already. I'll always be in favor of figuring out your messaging frameworks. Like, you mentioned the brand, you have the brand's positioning. Hopefully, the brand's positioning and it's reflective of what will create a compelling offering in market, so that connection again with the consumer. But do you know what the primary messaging points are that are actually going to elicit a response in that person? There are a lot of companies that have tons of benefits, but if you have 12 benefits, you can't come up with a plan for communicating based on those. You can if you have a hierarchy, like, oh, these 3 things are the things that are going to most likely create a conversion, and then these 3 things are support, and then the rest of these things come into play whenever it's topically relevant. That framework can be worked with to encompass all 12, but you're not going to jam 12 messages into a message where you're trying to acquire a customer. The customer just can't do that. So there's a lot of that foundational work that needs to be done. And once who you're talking to and what to say to them, then the core adage, when people say, what is marketing? I think that all still very much holds true. You're trying to bring a good or a service to market, and that relies upon being able to connect with an audience. And so there is, place, time, and what you say in those things to make that work. So you're talking about developing creative and all of those kinds of things. I think the creative, I didn't name them as a pillar in the marketing team, but they're obviously so fundamental across everything. Everything from how do we want to talk? What is the voice with which we talk to customers in customer care? What's the voice with which we, talk to customers in the creative that we put out and in communications once they're a customer? That is fundamental. And obviously the work of a ton of incredibly talented people in that realm as well. So creative is probably another pillar, or at the very least sits in that foundation, along with knowing the customer and research and insights there. And so that maybe gives you a flavor of where to start. Like, one of the worst things I will say about marketing is going to market and spending money when you don't know any of those things. Don't do that, right? Because that's more likely than not, it's a waste.
Mm. Okay, so let's talk about how should startups spend money. So I wonder, okay, so if you're a startup and then you're building like a marketing team, let's say if you're hiring for like the head of content, because I feel like in the venture capital ecosystem, everyone is their own like chief content marketer. They're like posting on Twitter every day or on LinkedIn, or like just like I feel like everyone's like generating content with like podcast, newsletter, these like tweets. So I wonder, to start off, like let's say if a startup is like trying to hire like a head of content, what should this person do? Like what on a day-to-day basis? Like I feel like I've seen a lot in the fintech realm. There's a lot of I mean, I like love that. Shout out to like Angela's like marketing team. So they have done a lot of like these like, oh, what is angel investing? What is like basically venture one-on-one stuff? I mean, I started doing it like because I feel like I consume a lot of these content.
Yeah.
I saw there's like the market basically market education piece. There's a webinar, which I assume that's where people get email and or like get leads. And then there is a giant white paper PDF like, oh, here's like an industry trend that you should download. And
Yeah.
there is also the podcast, and then there's a newsletter. And like I wonder what would be the, let's say, like let's call it like head of content marketing person's job be to like actually pull off all these different things.
Yeah, I think it's funny because from what you're describing, which I see happen as well. So to me, that feels, yes, there is a content aspect to what that person is doing if it's one person. I think there's also, in an interesting way, like once the efforts of the company, the marketing efforts of a company go beyond the founder, there's also a really interesting thing. It's almost product marketing. And what I mean by that is that it's somebody who is responsible, again, for knowing the audience and knowing what the audience needs. Do they need sell sheets? Do they need the how to, the 101s, the
Mhm.
how to's? Do they need webinar content? Is it emails? Is it social posts? Is it those kinds of things? But I think what's underlying the creation of all of those things is, again, the understanding, the insights of how what you're building connects to a customer. What does that person need? What is the driver? And to me, particularly in tech companies, that's a product marketer. That's somebody who can sit with the product team, understand what they're building, understand what the roadmap is. And I understand that product marketing roles and PM roles are different from organization to organization, but you need a really strong relationship between those sides of the equation so that the product, the roadmap of the product is being driven with the customer in mind. And then the content related to it, the marketing related to it is being created with the content in mind. Like if a sell sheet that enables a sales team isn't useful, don't make it. But maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's social posts, maybe it's an educational series. But it almost needs to be that person with both, and again, somebody who's adaptable, who can work high and low, so they can see that there's a strategy driving the content that's being created, and then either create some of the content themselves or know how to get it created or know how to wrangle internally. Oh, if the founder could create these talk pieces and some of the other folks could create these talk pieces, I'll be the person that brings all of that together. And what is also beneficial for that person is to, again, have an analytical mindset, because they're not only needing to sort of sit in that central hub position and be able to analyze what they know about the customer and then infer what's needed, but they also then need to be able to sit on the, once it's been done and it's in market side of things, and say, did it work? Did it actually help? Did it result in anything? So I think a lot of folks, I think there's a bunch of different ways you can go in terms of who is that first hire, right?
Mhm.
I think it can very much be the person that we just talked about, a product marketer with an orientation around the consumer that's highly analytical, but also has the ability to sort of, manage getting that content created. A lot of startups go in the direction of hiring a growth marketer, a performance marketer, right? They want to start low in the funnel, highly efficient, harvest any latent in-market demand of the target audience for whom their offering is a product market fit. And then you can expand, grow the team around that performance marketer as you expand your marketing mix. And that person also needs to have a lot of the same qualities of that product, marketing person. They need to be able to think high and low. They need to be able to set the strategy and also analyze the results of what they're doing and then determine how to proceed from there. So I think the key thing, no matter who the person is, I think that a lot of it is the qualities of that person will make them a fit for startup life, right? It is adaptability that is needed. You know it in your own business, right? There are new things that come up and you're like, oh, I need to figure that out. And is that a priority? I need to have the critical thinking skills to be like, am I going to focus on that or am I going to focus over here? They need to be able to work high and low, set strategy and execute. Everybody needs to have an analytical mindset, the ability to be data driven, to learn from what is presented to you from a data perspective and make decisions based off of that. So I think ultimately it will vary from company to company, but those skills are probably pretty universal.
Mm. I jotted down so many questions. Let's start with yeah, I'm sorry. I've been just typing voraciously. I'm like a big note taker. So I wonder, when you're thinking about analytical things, what would be your benchmark to judge if something is well performed? Would it be, let's say, I think it's easier to judge, let's say, if we have a PDF, let's judge the download rate, or if we have a newsletter to judge how many people open, or podcasts, how many people download. But is this the right benchmark? Because I don't really know if let's call it 100 people open we constantly see the thousands people open a newsletter, but
Yeah.
zero people buy, or I wonder what would be the right benchmark to judge this person's job, and how should you even set up the realistic ROI investment of
Yeah.
a team member?
So I think first of all, we need to back the truck up, right? A
Yeah.
whole long way, and really focus on what is the business metric that we're trying to drive, right? Are we trying to drive new customers into the system? If we're trying to drive new customers into the system, is it a one-time purchase? Is it a repeat purchase? Is it a subscription, or is it just, individual purchase, but you want to see repeat purchases over time? What is and then, how long are you able to keep them for? What is the value of their order? So you could bring in 10 people who spend, I don't know what you're selling, but they spend $100. It would be more desirable to bring in 10 people who spent $125 per purchase and also purchased 3 or more times, versus the person who comes in just the one time, spends $100, maybe takes advantage of a discount that you've offered, which brings your margin down. And so I think before you get to the marketing, the performance of the marketing tactic, and there's all the things that you said you can look at, but before you even get to the performance of the marketing tactic, what is the business problem you're trying to solve for? Is your primary problem acquisition or opportunity? Let's call it an opportunity instead of calling it a problem. Is your primary opportunity acquisition? Is your primary opportunity retention? Is your primary opportunity order value? All of those kinds of things. And then based on that and what the result of that will be to the bottom line of the business, then what is the tolerance? What does marketing efficiency need to look like? How much can you afford to spend on acquisition? And over what period of time do you need it to pay back to you? How many purchases do you need over what window in order for it to pay back to you? And then start to explore channels and test them for all those things that you just said. Then you work it from the other end. Okay, so if I do webinars as a means of explaining my product or service, and that drives in leads, and then I can take those leads and email them things that are useful to them or an offer and get them to convert. What's the cost of having done that? And is that person a good lead? Like, do they just come in and purchase the one time, or do they purchase multiple times, or do they sign up for a subscription? And if they sign up for a subscription, do they last, or do they cancel at some point because it wasn't useful for them? And then hone in who the best among those people are and try to lean in. Okay, so that was effective. I brought someone in by inviting them to a webinar, having them attend, emailing them afterwards. They converted into a customer, and they were a good customer. They signed up for a subscription and they stayed a long time, or they purchased multiple times because we were a fit. What scale is there in doing that? Can I do lots of webinars? How many webinars can I do before I run out of ramp room, right? Does it become does that efficiency maintain over time, or does it become less efficient? Like direct mail is a perfect example. Say you decide to test direct mail. You're offering a consumer package good, like something that you can buy, like this pen, right? And so I drop a mail piece about my amazing pen, and a bunch of people buy my pen, and I think, oh my God, that was amazing. That was so efficient. The cost of direct mail was really efficient. I'm going to do a lot more of that. But what you'll find over time is that if you're bombing people with direct mail, over time, fewer people are going to respond. It's not because you're not allowing them any breathing room between those mailings. And, that goes without saying that there's other stuff happening in other channels around them. So there's a point of diminishing return on some channels too. You have to ask the question of how much scale is in the channel, and then how much can I beat the drum? Even brands that are in TV, there's like a critical point that you need to get to in TV where you start to operate efficiently. And we all know this as consumers, right? How many times have I seen the ad before I even realize what I'm looking at, right? The reach and frequency curves would say you have to see it probably 4 or 5 times before it really connects with you. But how much spend in TV is too much, right? I watch quite a bit of on-demand TV, and they have a hard time filling that space. So they tend to fill it with the same ad over and over and over again. Once I've seen that ad the 5th time in one show, I'm saturated. That has no effective effectiveness on me. So I really hope they're getting it for free, because if they're spending money on it, it's not money well spent. So there's also that part of the consideration. So there's not a really straightforward answer to your question. Again, it all has to be data led, right?
Mhm.
You have to always relentlessly be testing,
Mhm.
because it's like, okay, so that works for me, but what about these other opportunities? Are they better? Will they be more efficient? Is there more scale? Is there more, are they more effective and more efficient than the channels that I'm in? So kind of a mantra needs to be always be testing.
Mm.
You're a marketer, because, being static or staying in the place where you are is the death knell
Mhm.
of marketing. It will not work over a long period of time.
I totally agree. I wonder, okay, so let's talk about testing and like the data part again. So let's say, um, okay, so I wonder what kind of, you mentioned about like there's also like a marketing sales like a return cycle as well. I'm sorry, like my term may be like very off.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Okay, so let's say if we advertise to like the universe, like we tweet a bunch, we send out a newsletter, we do some webinar, but not saturated webinar, like we don't do like 6 times a week. I
Yeah.
wonder, okay, so we did a bunch of things, and how would you like study the data? Like what data would you study? Let's say if your goal is to I feel like for each startup, it's like likely to be everything. So it's like we want new customer, we want the old customer to spend more money,
Yeah.
we want everything.
Yeah.
So what would be your time spent as this like head of marketing, head of content, or whatever you call it? Like, because I feel like more and more like when we're thinking about marketing, it's beginning to look like a lot of head of content because of maybe I'm living in a startup land and like they could only hire one marketer.
Yeah.
So, like the person have to generate blogs, have to like, put you on podcasts and like, you have to do like literally everything. You have to like
Yeah.
tweet a bunch, like, especially in the VC ecosystem, a lot of people just like depending on their intern to tweet about them. The
Yeah.
crypto era, it was a lot of crazy memes. So I wonder what exactly would be, let's say, 3 things that you do. Like, let's not do, like, overwhelming amount of things. Let's cut 3 things you do to for this, like, I guess, like, content marketing person slash using your word, product marketing person.
Yeah.
What would be, I guess, like, their core 3 job? And then what would be the 3 benchmark that you would evaluate your hire? If you're the CMO and you are hiring someone under you, and
Yeah.
what
So
would
say you have the one person, right? And the one
yeah.
person is responsible for the majority of the work that you're putting in market. Um, I think that it's a bit of a virtuous cycle, because I was gonna start with the customer. How
Mhm,
well do they know the customer? Is it driving the messaging that they're putting
mhm,
out? Is it driving the channels that they're choosing? Like, to your point, is the podcast that they did the best thing? Is the newsletter that they did the right channel? Like, did they pick the best low hanging fruit to focus on? What are the core channels? So part of it is the strategic part of it. Then part of it is the execution part of it. Did they do a good job creating those materials? And then once it hits in market, and I think this gets at the first question that you asked, you know, how are we measuring it? So say the point of the materials being created is to drive new customers into the
mhm,
ecosystem. So how many, how many visits did it generate? And then of those visits, how many people converted? And conversion is reliant on a bunch of things. Conversion is not just, was the content good? Was the content in the right channel? Did the content hit the right prospect? But where are you driving them? And what is the responsibility of where you're driving them? That holds a part of the equation as well. So did the product do its job to convert? And what is that reliant on? There's a marketing aspect to that, right? Did they land on a homepage or the front door of an app? And did that do its job? And what's the relationship between product and marketing to make sure that conversion is happening? Because those little wins in conversion
mhm.
are sometimes so much greater than the win of bringing more people into the top of the funnel. If it all breaks down at that conversion point, then that's not great, right? You're sort of bringing people into a leaky system and not converting them well. So there's that part of it as well. And then to your point of wanting it all, okay, fine. So they signed up, they did the thing, they bought the thing, they signed up for the thing that you wanted them to do. So you have that conversion metric. And then while it might not be how you optimize, although it should be over time, it might not be what drives you to optimize which channels you brought people in on. How long did they stay a customer, or did they repeat? Now, there's a lot of things that go into that equation too. Part of it, the reason I'm saying over time, it should become partly about the channel, because did the channel bring in the best customers, right? And did you target it? Was it targeting the right customers? But then there's also a whole lot that's happening on the other side of the conversion equation, because the product is responsible. Did the product do what it needed to do for the person who signed up or bought? Did it work well? Was it a quality experience? Did it align with what you promised them it would be in terms of the marketing? So I think a lot of the measures that you're looking at, you're looking at volume. And volume, like, it can be different. On Facebook, it can be, you can optimize to a lot of things. You can optimize to the click-through, you can optimize to the conversion, you can optimize to a whole bunch of things. You can optimize to them giving you their email address. So what did you choose in terms of what you were going to optimize towards, and did it actually, meet the mark? And then were you able to convert in that moment of truth? And then what happened after the moment of conversion, and what value did they bring in? Like, if I buy one pen, the cost of what you spent to get me to buy this one pen wasn't worth it. But if I subscribe and I get 3 pens a month because it's the only pen I use, I'm a great customer, right? So it depends on a lot of those things. And I think that's where the person, so you're, back to your one person, the content person or the product person, or, product marketer or whoever, that person has to be multi-aptitudinal, let's call it that. They have to be able to do a lot of different things. At a certain point, as you grow, that ecosystem goes boom, right? They can't scale doing all of those things, right? Eventually they would need to be 300% of a person in order to be able to do all of those things. And that's where you have to start to prioritize. Do I hire another one of those people to work high and low? Or do I specifically hire an analytics person? Or do I specifically hire a creative person to, take the brief from that original person that I hired and develop more content so that we can execute more? Or again, on the analytics end, do I hire somebody to actually put more rigor and system into the results so that we can sort of accelerate, the use of the rest of the team and not have them be so focused on that? So you sort of are expanding outward from that one person.
Taking notes. I wonder, so let's talk about, like, if you're running a bigger company, because your last company or Kayak, they're all like a lot bigger than a one person team.
Yeah.
And I wonder, let's say right now you have like a brand marketing person, and then now you have like a content person, and then maybe you have a, I guess, growth person, whatever you say. So how do everybody kind of like work together? Let's say you're like the CMO, and you have, like, under you there is, let's say, the content person lead 2 people who write blogs, or like, generate whatever, and generate tweets, or like creating videos on YouTube, like they're doing everything. And then this other person who does like the brand, and like, I wonder, like, so yeah, like maybe they were doing something like, running, I don't know, putting a poster on the like bus station, or putting a poster in the airport or something, like doing all these like crazy stuff. And they're, or like, yeah, I constantly see like different companies like ads on buses. I think they're just crazy, and then like I don't really know how like good the conversion is. But I wonder, there's also the I'm sure like they're working, otherwise like people wouldn't be doing. But I'd be really curious on like what's the data there. And then there's the third pillar. Maybe it's like the product marketing, I guess the product marketing is already the content marketing. Okay, so let's say you're running this like marketing team. How do everybody all work together? And what would be your like, let's say you're the CMO, and then what would be your like Monday look like to be like, okay, so here's like my metrics for everybody, and then like in the Monday meeting, what would you say to like everybody?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is there's a lot of interrelationship between the roles, even if it's just the roles that you just described, right? Like it's very likely that the content person or the person that generates social stuff, or if it's a person who is responsible for, planning and buying the media placements, like the bus things that you talked about.
Wait, how do people even buy a bus thing? I'm
You buy it
so
through a media
curious.
company. Yeah, I mean, you buy it through a media agency, or you can buy. There are networks that sell those kinds of assets, whether it be out of home, broadly out of home assets, or bus kind of assets. Um, you should go through a media agency. Media agencies buy at scale. You'll never go directly to one of those networks as a startup and get a better rate than a media agency
How
will be
much
able to
would they
negotiate
cost?
on your behalf. It depends, right? It depends on the market. Like you can't really compare New York I mean, name another market. I don't want to
Yeah.
disparage any market, but there are a lot of markets that are, New York and LA and Chicago and Miami are sort of, it's
The
hard to replicate that market. And then there are a lot of second tier markets. And I don't say second tier in a pejorative way. I just mean from a size perspective. And so the media cost is always going to be related to eyeballs. How many eyeballs are getting on it? And you brought up the primary challenge with out of home, which we could spend a lot of time talking about, but I won't talk about it, which is then how do you track it, right?
Yeah, how do
And
you track it?
I
Welcome
think
to the
I think for
like
a lot of people that advertise in out of home, they're doing a job locally. They're trying to drive to a store, right? Like when I was on Verizon Wireless at McCann, out of home there were two main reasons to do out of home. One was to drive to a retailer that was in the area, and the other was to increase perception of their network. Like we have coverage here, right? Like billboard out in the middle of nowhere, we have coverage here. And the coverage here is measured more perceptually in
Mhm,
terms of brand metrics, but they do measure foot traffic to the
mhm,
retailer locations. And so there is a tie there. And
mhm.
some out of home does include a call to action. That's really, really difficult because by the time you drive home and pull into your driveway, you're just going to the primary URL. You're not going to the URL that has the code on the back, like the offer on the back of it or
Mhm.
anything like that. So it's much, much harder to measure, but you can get those market level dynamics to measure. But bringing it back to the question that you asked, I think there's probably a scenario where some of those people would report to the brand person, right? So that
Mm.
in and of itself creates already a dynamic, or they report to the performance person. If you have a performance marketer as your primary hire, then somebody who plans and buys media and is optimizing against results, and somebody who's creating content could report there, so that there's a bit of a structure there. But for me as the CMO, my primary responsibility to the team is, do you know what the priorities are? If you don't, I haven't really done my job very well, right? So if you know that our priorities are driving profitable growth, right? That it's acquisition at a CAC that we're managing to, and we're measuring, we have certain measures in place about, for retention and any other thing that you're measuring against. Okay, so that's priority number one. Priority number two is to create a presence for the brand related to this one key attribute, right? Like we want to be perceived as a technology company.
Mhm.
Great. So what are the measures? Like how are we achieving that goal? So that might be priority number two. And the things that I might be doing against that are also content related, right? So the content all has as an underpinning to it our story as a technology company. I'm doing PR. I'm talking to you on this podcast about the fact that we're this
Mhm.
amazing technology company and look what we're building and what problems we're solving. And then I can measure the impact of that in market. And then say, I don't know, maybe the third priority is that we don't have a very good testing program. We need more rigor behind how we test. So, this quarter, this half of a year, this year, we're really focused on establishing a testing program. Say those are your three priorities. if I've done my job, the team is aware that those are the priorities, and they show up at work every day prioritizing the gajillion things that they have on their desk against those 3 priorities. Oh, so this thing where it's sort of like, you know, a thing that contributes to, like, the somebody in the company bought us a sponsorship at some festival, and we don't really think that it's great from an acquisition perspective, but we have to do it because we committed to it, or whatever, those kinds of things, because those kinds of things will always come up. That's not as much of a priority as the core work you're doing against those 3 objectives. So number 1 for me is everybody clear on the objectives. Most often you can review those in a team meeting or in an all hands meeting. Even if the team is small, maybe you have a gathering on a weekly or a monthly basis to review, here are our primary goals, here's where we are against those goals, here are the things that we should be focusing on. And so the Monday morning meeting is just, how's everybody doing on their priorities against these priorities? So if these, and then also I'm showing up at that Monday meeting with any updates, like what's happening from a business level. Oh, last month we were great on acquisition, but we had a really hard time. It wasn't as many high value customers. People were churning. There seems to be a problem here, and we're going to do like a concerted effort to make sure that we're plugging this leak in terms of people defecting or canceling or those kinds of things. It's my responsibility to both bring to the table any updates from the broader company that may not have made their way to everybody, and then also to check in with people on how they're doing against their priorities. Oh, are you hitting a roadblock? Oh, this person has been out for the last month and I haven't been able to do anything to advance objectives on this role. Okay, great. Let's see if we can figure out how to make that better. Who should we talk to? Do we have a meeting together with somebody else and try to kick it off with somebody else, or how do we do those things? So everything has to be driven by an awareness of those priorities, those marketing priorities, and those marketing priorities need to be set up in service of your business objectives.
Okay. So I think those are really amazing lessons. Like definitely prioritize on like just focusing on like what the companies prioritize on is like
Yeah.
very, very important. I wonder, let's say if you are um again going back to your own department, like a
Yeah.
earlier person who's like running marketing somewhere, or like let's say like if they join like for example, a lot of listeners who come for this episode, maybe they're like already working in marketing. They want
Yeah.
to join like a startup. And let's say if you never let you mention about like performance marketing, what would be the tools that you would use for these kind of um marketings? So like basically I know that performance marketing is like I feel like what I work probably the closest with, because they are like the people who are buying ads on podcasts or newsletter
Yeah.
or something. Um I wonder, what does it look like for this person's like job to be compared to like the content, the brand, or other people on the team?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that person, if it's a performance marketing manager or someone more senior or less senior, whoever that, if they're the person that is responsible for that practice, they're likely going to have responsibility over some pool of money, right?
Mhm.
And so they're going to have to figure out how to allocate that spend. So again, they're going to have to make sure, okay, do I know what customer I'm going after? So their analytical abilities, their ability to think logically, to think pragmatically, but also think creatively is the core. They are very much that intersection of science and art, probably leaning more towards the science. But if you're looking at allocating a pot of money, who is my audience? Where am I going to find that audience? And then what, either I'm working with an agency who's helping me put together a plan to reach that audience, or I, as an individual, am working with, I'm calling you, Grace, to see if I can buy ads on your podcast. And I have a rep at Meta who's helping me figure
Mhm.
out if I can place social ads. And maybe I have somebody who's reporting to me who is responsible for the email marketing, who does both lead management and also manages communications to existing customers. So maybe that's like a carve out of that responsibility. I'm responsible for that.
Mhm.
I look at that Whether I'm working with an agency to determine how to spend the money or I'm doing it myself by reaching out directly to these entities, how much are they asking me to spend? What percentage of the pool of funds do I have? What return am I expecting from that? What return have I seen when I've already spent? What do I think the drivers are of that result? Do I think it was because the channel was awesome, or not awesome? Do I think it's because I tested two creative executions and one creative execution did wildly better than the other? Do I think that I could do better than that? If I could I test a new creative against that? Who am I going to work with on the team to do the content development, or am I responsible for the content development? I'm trying to sort of outline it as if you have more resource or if it's just you doing it. So a lot of those things might be things you need to figure out, or if you have a little bit more resource on the team, there are people that you can reach out to work with to create those things. How am I going to put together the plan? And again, always in service of what's the business goal overall. My goal for this month is to generate X new customers, and I need to do it on a blended basis. Like maybe some channels can be a little more expensive, some channels a little bit less, but at a blended cost, I need to land in this mark. So I need to get this many customers at this many costs, at this much cost per customer.
Mhm.
And then what is my strategy? What's my approach? Am I going to go, whole hog into content creation because I think long form content is more appealing to my target audience? Or am I going to go in the social ads, quick ads on a podcast, that realm, because all I want to do is spark interest, and then I want to drive them to a landing page or a website. There is where they're going to learn a whole lot more. That will get them over the hurdle. So again, like there's all three levels. There's the understanding of the business objective. There's what is the strategy or the approach for how I'm going to spend the money. Then how am I going to execute it? And then the fourth level is actually executing it and measuring it and having the cycle repeat itself through the system. So if I'm a performance marketer, and that's a very high level, there's a lot more work that these folks are doing, but at a very high level, that's kind of the ecosystem that they're operating against.
Um, would you say the performance marketer have to have a benchmark? Like, is there any industry like temperature check kind of checklist? Okay, here's our size, and then here's the funding that we raised, and then here's how much we spent, and this is what we got. Is there a kind of industry conference or industry kind of like benchmark on what we're doing? Because I feel like that would be really hard to judge.
Yeah, there's not one, like if there's no holy grail, right? Like there's no
Okay.
one answer for any one industry. But I will say that there are networks of people,
Mhm.
who work there are networks of performance marketers who share with each other what they're seeing. How do things look in this particular channel? Are you having a hard time acquiring people in this channel? Have you seen costs go up in this channel? I've seen costs go up in this channel. And then within that, you can probably find people who are in the same industry as you. What are you seeing in this industry? What are some of the trends? So there's never, I mean, that's kind of the beauty and the challenge of
Mhm.
it, right? Is that there's no cookie cutter, there's no one formula, or else everybody would be doing the one formula. But there are definitely signals that you can get, and folks tend to get to know one another. They communicate across lines and share information. People are very generous with their time and information to say what trends they're observing in certain channels and across the marketplace as a whole, so that people can judge, is it just me? Am I nuts? Like, is it only us?
Mhm.
Are we the only ones seeing this happening, or are we the only ones with this channel? 100% of the time you're not.
Mhm.
It would be very rare if you were the only one experiencing a certain kind of channel, unless there's something internally that is broken with your systems internally. You are most likely not the only person. You are not alone. There are other people out there that can offer a point of view or an opinion.
Mm.
But unfortunately, there's no formula. There's no set formula.
Mm. I wonder when it comes to you just brought up like maybe performance marketing is also including like the Google or ads or like Meta ads or something. So I wonder, let's say if you are a startup, like what's your thinking framework on advertising on these like big company ads spread spread and pray? I don't know if it's spread and pray or like what is
It's not
the
necessarily
what
spray
is
and
it?
pray, right? Like the beauty of a lot of those platforms, I'll take Google or Bing or whatever,
Yeah,
whichever
yeah,
you want to start. And if you want to start doing search engine marketing, is that it's not spray and pray. There's a lot of opportunity to target and to optimize based on keywords that people are searching for. And so I think that, some of the challenges, and this is not targeted at Google or any one platform in particular, I think you need to ensure as a marketer sitting on the side of, spending the money in the channel, that you're getting access to the data that is going to help you make decisions. There are, some places where you can spend, some platforms where results are somewhat obfuscated, where
mhm,
you don't necessarily have complete visibility into the information that you need to optimize based on. And that is super challenging. But I think the beauty of all of these, particularly digital platforms, is actually the ability to track. I think the thing that you always have to keep in mind, though, is, say I'm spending money on Google or Bing or wherever, or Meta, or, or wherever. What else am I doing in the marketplace that's impacting that? There's a lot of different ways to go about measuring. Last click is only one way to measure, and you're very likely shortchanging your own efforts as a marketer if all you're looking at is the last click. So there are ways to, spread the clicks out. You can do multi-click attribution. You can favor first and last, sort of create that U shape where you weight the first contact and the last content more highly than the contacts in the middle. You can also, there are also attribution surveys. Attribution surveys are lovely as a data point. They are as flawed as any of the other methods because people forget, or people choose the option that is the most convenient. I have no idea where I actually saw your brand last. I'm going to guess it was Instagram, and they're
mhm.
going to, select that on the attribution surveys. You can actually also model the performance out. I think the thing is you need to be aware of your own biases, whatever system you choose. You need to be aware of the flaws of it, and you need to be consistent with it. So you can't, out of convenience, say, I'm going to do all last click, and I'm not going to have any space in my brain for the possible impact of the touches that came before it. That's flawed. If you're going to choose last click, you at least need to be aware of what you're leaving on the table and what's driving your decision making. And the same is true with any of those methods. They're all in some way or another flawed. You need to pick a lane and stay in the lane, but also be aware of what you're sacrificing when you do choose that lane in terms of how you measure. Oh, I think you froze. Grace, I lost you. Hi.
I am so sorry. I don't know what's happening. Maybe I opened too many different windows.
It's
It
totally
just
fine. All of a sudden, I realized that I was going on and on about measurement, and then I came back to you, and you were frozen. I was like, "Uh oh." I lost
Oh
Grace.
my god. I'm so sorry, this never happened, I don't know why, like, this is, like, I feel like my computer is, like, overbearing on my, like, 75 windows open, and I was typing, like, just, like, super aggressively. So, anyway, yeah.
All good.
So, we were talking about, like, I guess, like, the last part of the, thing was, Google marketing. I don't know, I'll let you finish. Like, I don't know what were the last thing we chat about. Like, I
It was
remember it
more
was, like,
just
about, like, how to measure Google marketing
yeah, it was
result,
more
and then
just to be mindful of your measurement and what biases the measurement is creating. I think I definitely think that it's not spray and pray.
mhm,
I think that you simply need to be mindful of how you're measuring and what it is you're inferring from that measurement, because a lot of the measurement there are flaws to all the
mhm,
approaches, right? So, and you need to do internal communication as well to make sure that you're aligned on what assumptions you're making around measurement and how
mhm,
you're then using that, what you've measured and the results that you're seeing, to inform next steps. Because you could be sitting with the exec team, say you're sitting with the CEO and the CFO and the chief product officer, and you're talking about the recommendation for how you want to, how you want to spend for the next month. And if you haven't aligned on the assumptions that you're making around measurement and how you're
mhm,
using that to inform your approach, then there's probably going to be a lot of questions, and rightly
mhm,
so. um, because all of these things have nuances to them, that aren't necessarily perfect.
mm. Totally. Okay, on that note, I have a quick 1-minute fire round for you.
Okay. Oh God.
What what's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Oh, that's really hard, actually. So I love the Dune books. I
Mm.
the six original. I know that there are others, and then there are some. There were notes that he left when he passed away, and his son picked them up and wrote an ongoing series of other books. But the original six Dune books are amazing and probably my favorite books.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I would have to say, so when I worked on the agency, I met a fellow by the name of Robert Burge, and the first time we ever worked together, we worked together in the agency, but I did not report to him. And then I left the agency and came back to report to him. And then when I went client side, I reported to him again. And I would just say he's one of those people that has sort of the energy for
Mhm.
constant mental activity is unparalleled. I only know a very few people like that are always on at like 99%.
Oh my
If,
god.
if you know what I mean, like, and he's one of those people. And I think just what he has taught me about marketing and what the mentorship that he has provided with me, I think that has probably had the biggest impact on my career for sure.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to my dinner party? Oh my gosh. Um, huh. I don't know. I kind of just want to have dinner with my family. I like my family.
That's so
Um,
sweet.
I would probably be my first choice would be to have dinner with all of my family. I don't know if there's ever anybody that I'd want to like, pick their brain to see how they think. There are so many fascinating people out there. I think Jim Carrey's pretty fascinating. I think there are a lot of business people out there that are interesting. Not that I'd necessarily want to be friends with them, but I'd love to be able to pick their brains. But no, if I had one dinner to have and that was all that I could have, I would probably just want to have dinner with my family.
Where can we find you outside work?
Where can you find me outside of work? You can either find me outside in nature walking my dog, or at a bookstore, probably.
Oh, I love that. I love both of the answers. Well, Stephanie, well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a
Yeah.
fun chat.
Thanks for having me, Grace. It was so great to see you.
Let me quickly unstream.